Okay, welcome to our podcast, Becoming a True Human. I'm Dave Kopaz. I'm a psychiatrist in Seattle. Not for long, though. I'm moving to Madison, Wisconsin because I want to be closer to Chris, but not too close. Chris?
I'm so happy that you're coming close, but not too close. My name is Chris Smith. Part of my stock and trade over the years has been a marriage and family therapist and a mindfulness teacher. And Dave, you and I have put in a few miles together, haven't we? Teaching through the VA the whole health. And so that's a little
We
bit
have.
about me, and we just want to say welcome.
Yeah, and there was only one incident of police involvement, if I remember correctly.
Only one.
Yeah, with us working together. I know you've had your own share of experiences teaching mindfulness to police officers.
And also inmates. I also want
Oh,
to.
yeah. Yeah, any updates, anything you want to talk about before we get started?
No, I'm good this time.
Okay. Got a couple updates. Joseph Rael and I had that piece published in About Place on uh, collaboration, and we've got a few of our art pieces that we did together that I kind of finished off a few things. I just had a poem published in Closler on the Closler site through Johns Hopkins. What is it called? It's something like On Touching the Wound with Words and Hands, I think is the name of the poem. And I think that's it. Oh, and Caring for Self and Others is 1 year old this week. You know, my book that I published last year, it's just the 1 year anniversary, and I've been too busy with the move to really do much for it. So,
Well, congratulations.
yeah, thanks. Then we got a house showing today, in an hour and like 12 minutes. So we're on a time clock today. Today we're
So
going to talk.
not much in the way of freedom in terms of time. Is that
No,
right?
we're limited. Part of freedom is working within the constraints that you're given. So, and that's going to be our topic. We're coming up on the 4th of July. We're going to talk about freedom. And then also I've been feeling the opposite of freedom. And if you play with the word and break it apart, you can have free doom. So I kind of feel like I'm getting a lot of doom for free lately, and I'd rather not have that. I'd rather have freedom. So we're going to do some talking and meditating on freedom and its opposite today. And Chris, I know you've been preparing for this diligently. Would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I would like to start us off with a question. You were bringing up kind of just playing with the words free and doom. And my question for you to start out, is it possible to have freedom without some measure of doom? And when I'm talking about doom, I'm really using that in a metaphorical way, right? There's always within some freedom, there's always inherently some aspect of it which is not freedom. And I'm just curious how you might respond to that question.
Yeah, yeah. We look at a couple ways, and one would be a Joseph Rael approach of looking at the sound of the word and the letters. So we've got f, doom, doom. So freedom. I mean, the doom is in the word itself. So of course you're going to have a relationship with it. And I think freedom, so that it's going to, in a way that if you look at the two parts of it, you're free from doom is the freedom. But depending on how you define doom, let's look at this. So Erich Fromm, in Escape from Freedom, wrote about he was trying to figure out how in the heck all these Germans, I believe he was German, um, all these Germans followed Hitler. And in talking about escape from freedom, he said that humans have two instincts. One is to be free, but the other is that freedom is scary. And maybe that's the doom element. You don't know what you're going to have when you have freedom. So there's this also impulse to escape from freedom, to give up your freedom to someone else who then has your freedom and makes your life more easy and defined. And Fromm talked about freedom from, which is, freedom from like negative freedom. You're escaping something that you don't want. You're escaping the doom. And freedom to, meaning the positive thing that you're going to do with your freedom. So I guess going back to this, I would say two different ways. Freedom is always in relationship to doom. I don't know if freedom would have to contain doom itself. Another way of looking at it is um, everything you do in life means that you can't do something else. We're an individual. And so when if you become a psychiatrist, for instance, you're also not going to be an astronomical aeronautical engineer and design spacecraft for NASA, which was my first attempt at a career.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, psychiatry.
Yeah. So, there's certain things, that you choose with your freedom that limits your choices. Because I suppose pure freedom could be anarchy, and that's something Fromm talks about, and also Timothy Snyder. I think too of like, does freedom mean you do whatever the hell you want? We could argue that some might argue that that's complete freedom, but others would argue that that's you're not really developing your authentic self. And that's what Fromm says freedom is, that you're growing and developing in your authentic self, that the society supports that as well. So I don't know. What do you think about, do you have to have some doom and freedom?
Well, so what's fresh for me is I recently submitted this book that I've been writing called Colon Talk to the editor. And near the end of this book, one of the things that I found myself thinking about that I think has some overlap with this idea of freedom and doom as it pertains to the body. And so, certainly with, uh, let's just say, ulcerative colitis, there is a lot of pain and not a lot of freedom from pain when one is in the middle of a flare. And as I began reflecting on this book, when I was about two-thirds of the way through it, one of the things I began noticing was how I had been writing about this particular part of my body. And I'm going to say more of a doom or more negative way. And which made sense. That was my experience of it. Then it began to dawn on me. And I think some of this came from me reading more about the vagus nerve and the vagus nerve that connects, again, our digestive all the way up to the brainstem, and how there's this constant communication. About 80% of the communication comes from, the digestive tract all the way up to the brainstem. And it occurred to me in that moment that this very part of the body that I thought was killing me was also keeping me alive. It was telling me that what to eat, what not to eat. It was making plans, helping me to figure out that all of this information was actually coming from the very part of the body that I'm going to say is doomed, was doomed. And so it began for me, helped me to see that there's this combination. And I'm going to just use kind of like our terms, freedom and doom. There's a continuum, there's a relationship. It's not one or the other. It began to dawn on me that it's a relationship between both. Not necessarily all negative, not necessarily all positive, but there's this ongoing conversation between, again, when I'm going to kind of borrow from you, freedom and doom, or in my case, pain and health and resilience. And then this is just this ongoing conversation. And to some degree, I can shape some of that, and in some degree, I cannot. And so that's what I want to talk to you about. And sort of the next question is, to what degree do we, as humans who are becoming true humans, to what degree do we have agency in this conversation between freedom and doom? And then the second question, So agency, and to what degree do we do not have agency? And how, again, how would you speak to both of these two different parts?
I was thinking about life and death. Can we have freedom if we're doomed to die? Or are we more free knowing that we've got a limited time and everything is precious here? Would we just squander things? And would I have like gone off at some point and become a psychiatrist and then an astronomical aeronautical engineer? Um, would I have more freedom if I could do that? And life is sort of designed in such a way that there's a end point, there's a terminus to it. And so we're kind of defined in a way, human life is defined by birth and death. Um, Something that keep coming up too. I remember we had my wife and I, our first cat and our first dog died within about a year of each other. And one of them died very quickly. The dog was on a walk and just let out a yelp and she fell over and was dead.
Oh,
And
goodness.
I told our cat, when you go, please, it's so painful not to be able to say goodbye, stick around. And then he had this terrible cancer, this head cancer that, slowly ate away at him. And I was like, death just sucks. You go fast, it sucks. And there's things that you didn't get to say goodbye. It goes slow and it sucks because it's just so painful. And then I started thinking, why do we have all these pets? And most of our pets have much shorter lives than we do. What is it about human beings? Even like, why after we had our dog and cat die, did we go out and get another dog and cat and not say, oh, well, we know where this is going. This is just going to end in us getting sad again from their deaths, before we die. So unless you get like a tortoise or something that's going to outlive you, you know, any pet is going to die. And then I started to think that life and death and love is in there too, that the amount of pain you have goes along with love. And it's sort of a yin yang type of thing of that love and pain are sort of intrinsically linked. So I don't know, where do you want to go with that?
So again, I was seeking again another way of looking at free and doom.
Hmm.
And kind of to me, what you're saying is that both are inherent.
Yeah.
Uh, it's part of being human. And if it's part of being human, how do we live fully? Or let me borrow from our title. How do we become true human beings, knowing that this is part of the ticket that we've punched?
Wow.
Because we can't have it all, right? We can't be whatever
No.
totally free, and we may not want that. But how do we live ourselves, our lives as fully, knowing that there's cancer, and there's slow deaths, there are quick deaths, there are limited choices in terms of vocations.
Hmm.
And so, how would you respond to that?
Yeah. I think it's that, Fromm talks about this idea of authenticity. Let me see. Here he's talking a little bit more about democracy. One thing he talks about too is that as we individuate, so he has this theory that in the Middle Ages we didn't have a lot of individuality and freedom, but we were very connected into a social milieu. But with the Reformation and with capitalism and industrialization, people became more and more individual units. And in becoming an individual unit, you lost the connection. So there's the feeling of, he might almost say psychological evolution of the evolution of the individual. And we could also say that that's something pathological that we've lost our sort of social cultural connections. But so he sees us as kind of halfway up the cliff. And do we decide keep going up the mountain to get to the top, which maybe this cliff is happens to be Maslow's hierarchy. You know, do we climb up for self-actualization, or do we um, climb slowly back down, or even leap back down and leave it up to somebody else? Try to submerge ourselves back into the masses to have inauthentic freedom, which is action. You can have two different types of inauthentic freedom. One is to be passive and not do anything and let others control you. The other is to be active, but to be active from an inauthentic place. So, in a way, when I failed calculus my first semester of college and was on academic probation, um, as I've kind of thought about that for a while, I am a little technical and a little logical, and I like technical drawing, but I think becoming an engineer was more my family's idea. It was sort of they were like, you're smart. Why don't you become an engineer? You make good money. And I had a lot of teachers in the family. They're like, don't become a teacher, become an engineer. Nobody thought about becoming a doctor. There were no doctors in the family. And so it was almost like an engineer it was we were in this flat land, literally in the Midwest, and it was a little hill. Sorry, any engineers, I don't mean to demean you, but for the milieu I was in, it was like, you're going to go far, you're going to go high, become an engineer. And there weren't all these other possibilities that were there. But then I read Carl Jung, and something opened up inside of me. I was like, I don't know if I've talked to you about this epiphany, but I've written about it before. I'm in Midwest winter, sitting in my dorm room, really in a doomy place, not sure what I'm going to do. And I'm just, how you sort of stare sometimes and you don't realize you're staring. And then I was like, what am I staring at? And my desk had this row of books. And so I close focused, and looked at the books. And I was like, I wonder if by looking at what I'm interested in, I can decide what it is that I would love to do instead of this thing that other people say would be good for me to do. And so then I pulled off Modern Man in Search of Its Soul. And I was like, oh, Carl Jung, anthropology, cross culture, spirituality, creativity, the brain, and medicine. And then I look, and he's a psychiatrist. And then I pull another book off the shelf, and it was The Road Less Traveled. And I was like, oh, I really liked reading this book too. Who's this Scott Peck guy? Oh, a psychiatrist. Oh, psychiatrists are people who study whatever they want. All the really interesting, cool things in life they get to study. Um, and then that was this sort of epiphany for me that helped me find what I feel is kind of my true calling. And even when you say, thank you to the psychiatry side, um, I I feel that this job that I could live 10 lifetimes in this job and still be, not really exhaust all of the interest that I have in it and the possibilities. So here, I'll read something from Fromm and then hand it back over to you. It has been the thesis of this book that freedom has a twofold meaning for modern man. And he's writing in 1941, so it's gendered uh, pronouns here, modern man, that he has been freed from traditional authorities and has become an individual, but that at the same time he has become isolated, powerless, and an instrument of purposes outside of himself, alienated from himself and others. Furthermore, that this state undermines his self and weakens and frightens him and makes him ready for submission to a new kind of bondage. Positive freedom, on the other hand, is identical with the full realization of the individual's potentiality, together with his ability to live actively and spontaneously.
One thing that's coming up for me with this, Dave, is, and I don't think you've said this, so this probably is a gap on my part. But sometimes when I think about freedom, it is seen as an individual sport. That it's looking like you mentioned Maslow's hierarchy, which is used a lot, but it kind of can focus on the individual. And as you know, our culture is very much that. That would be a critique that I might have. I was having a conversation with my neighbor, who I hope you'll meet someday. Um, he he's from Africa, and we were talking about this very interesting thing that's happening in education, where actually AI has been interfacing with many of the universities and community colleges, posing as students, and actually has been withdrawing funds that are were to be allotted to students, and it's something that's still sort of under the news right now. But it's they haven't figured out yet how to solve this, and they're very
AI is autonomously doing this, or
some group or
somebody is
organization.
deciding that they're going to shift money to AI versus to the students.
Some group behind that's programmed AI to interface
Mm,
with different educational, and they only discovered this because of enrollments going up, and somehow the AI goes in and does the homework and participates in chat groups, so it has all the evidence that it's a real person. So anyway, part of his task has been to bring different people together to try to problem solve this. And part of what he recognizes is that this is a type of solution that takes everybody. Part of the dilemma is the individualism that exists in groups of everybody. And so it's actually getting in the way of resolving or really addressing the technical side of this. And so anyway, we were just reflecting, or he was reflecting on um, how, in Africa, that it's us, it's not I. And in fact, I remember you when back in the old days when we were traveling together in the VA with the whole health initiative. And I remember you were the one that really opened my eyes when you look at the very center of the whole health circle of health. It used to have I, and you were the one that said, "Hey, it should also say we."
it was
And
me, and
we,
we. Yeah,
thank
like
you.
mirror image kind of. You
Yeah.
look at if me looks into the water, it would see we kind of reflected back up as the mirror image.
So with this freedom that we were talking
Hmm.
about,
Yeah,
curious, how might you respond from a more of a we
yeah.
perspective? And this could go in a lot of different directions,
Hmm.
but just generally, what would you say to that?
It's a good point. I think Fromm, in a way, and Jung too, individuality, the individuation for Jung, it was individuation as the primary goal of human development. Fromm, I think, touches a little bit on this, that the spontaneous creative expression of the individual is kind of the pinnacle of freedom, and spontaneous creative um, uh, is sort of artistic production or living your life authentically means that you're interacting, you're leaving yourself and you're interacting. If you make an art piece, you're sharing it with others. If you create a new way to, you know, deal with water pollution, you're doing that with others. And you create a new way to, whatever, a better mousetrap. That these things lead from the individual. So perhaps Jung and Fromm are still stuck within, like what Einstein said, of trying to solve a problem using the same tool that created the problem. They're trying to say, problem isn't individuality. The problem is that we haven't really truly become individuals. And when we truly become individuals, we actually would move into more of like an I thou relationship. When you're a true individual, you can treat, you become a true subject and you can interact with a thou. Whereas when you're in a sort of partial individualism, you're in an I it relationship.
You're making reference to Martin Buber, the philosopher.
Yes, yes. So, yeah, so I think I mean, that's one of the things I've thought about too with caring for self and others, and this dilemma of burnout in clinicians. where burnout kind of pulls people back into themselves, or compassion fatigue, another term. You no longer have the ability to give to others. You're suffering, you're in the doom, and you can't help others out of the doom. And you get in a doom spiral. Some of the resilience work has focused on, well, you as an individual, you go off and you meditate by yourself, or you go off and you do yoga, but you're kind of in, you might be doing it with others, but you're in your own sort of space. Um, but how can we move into what Thich Nhat Hanh, and then Charles Eisenstein borrows this too, the concept of interbeing, which is similar to Ubuntu, going back to Africa. This Ubuntu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu defines Ubuntu as I am, you are, therefore I am. So I can't be an individual unless I'm in a community, because the community actually supports the individual. And ecological thinking is reinforces this as well. The individual organism does not exist in a vacuum. The individual organism, to be truly healthy, requires the entire health of the ecosystem. If anything in the ecosystem is unhealthy, you can't say that any individual in that ecosystem is at its peak health. So this idea of interbeing, then Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, um, you are a similar type of thing of you are, I am, we inter are. So, and then Dan Siegel, I just saw, have you seen Dan Siegel's book? He has a book that has in the subtitle, um, WME, is WME. He tries to coin a new word, which is um, individualism contextualized in collectivism, WME. So me and we, he even takes that a step further than I did with the me, we in the circle of health. It's we can't even think of the individual as separate from the collective.
There's a lot of ancient wisdom around that, isn't there? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just curious from the perspective, because you have had a relationship with Joseph Riel over the years, and I suspect he might have he might have a few things to say about this as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'll ask him about freedom. I don't know that we've talked about that. But for the shaman is a hollow bone. The shaman doesn't build up his or her own individuality to come in and say, it's all me. I'm the healing force here. The shaman becomes a hollow bone, and the more hollow, the more healing energy can flow through. So the more you can get ego out of the healing interaction, the more the healing energy flows through. And so you're more of a conduit rather than um, compared to in contemporary medicine, where the physician isn't even um, the healing force. The physician has given it over to pharmaceuticals and to techniques, surgical techniques, and other sort of techniques. So in modern medicine, the healing power is sort of projected off onto things, and the physician becomes kind of a hollow bone in a way, but it's more of like an empty shell rather than a hollow bone, where it's just somebody who is trying to connect the the sickness with the pharmaceutical or technique.
How have you practiced as a psychiatrist? Since I think we're spinning around that today a little
Hmm.
bit. How have you practiced in this way as a hollow bone? Or what are the moments
Hmm.
where that has happened for you?
Yeah,
Just to give
I think
some,
that,
an example.
yeah, I think that's where intuition comes in sometimes, of knowing when to use the therapeutic use of self, or knowing when to a movie or a book or something comes up and you think about it maybe three times during an interaction with a patient. You keep saying, why am I thinking about this thing? I just want to push it out. Um, and then the key thing is, are you doing it about yourself to kind of take away, to make it about you? Or are you bringing something of yourself in that then it provides like a role modeling, or kind of a new template or metaphor for the person to think about things in a different way?
You're making me think a number of years ago, there was a particular case that came to me as a family therapist, and part of my work was in a very small county. I'm pointing behind me, north of Milwaukee. And this particular case, there was an adolescent that had been kicked out of a um, psychiatric facility, had did some damage, and ultimately the place that he was at didn't know what to do and discharged them. And so sometimes what happens, not always, those types of challenging cases will be sent to the county, and that's where I came in. And I personally, I was very fearful. I thought, what if that happens here in the building? And I had some fear. So I had the first appointment with this particular person and their family, and just to get some history. And I won't take any credit for this. It just happened. I remember him talking about his grandfather, and it was just like maybe two or three sentences. And maybe you or some of our listeners have had this experience. And I just noticed, for whatever reason, that when he talked about his grandfather, there was just something different. Maybe I felt more comfortable. I mean, I can't explain it, but there was something different. And one of the things that seemed to happen is that his grandfather would take him fishing. And this was a connection for him in a life probably full with a lot of broken connections. And so the next time, maybe the next week or two, when he returned for another therapy session, I gave him a fishing pole. And I said, why don't we go fishing? It just so happened that where my office was in the county was literally 2 blocks from water. And so we just went down there and just hung out, and really nothing, I won't say much happened. But then he became more interested in fishing. And one of the things that happened, which I had no way of anticipating, was that he began fishing in the same place, and he began meeting other fisher persons, some of them grandfatherly like, and they began this group of fisher people, included men and women, began taking him in and giving him lures and advice, and but developed sort of, he became part of the community. And ironically, some of the very incidences that got him to me and got him into this residential place just changed. Now, was this person free from all of doom, let's say?
Mhm.
No, no. However, some of these more extreme behaviors did definitely end with him. And it was just one of those moments where, again, I don't claim any expertise, but it just, it sort of just unfolded in this way.
Yeah.
And that for me is when that sort of happened.
You're probably aware of the healing space. Like when you enter into this healing space and everything seems to drop away, everything becomes more vivid, and it's almost this sacred, you've entered into the sacred shared space. And you pick up on Julie Cameron talks about the vein of gold. You see a little sparkle, and you're like, that little sparkle there, I'm going to see what's there. And you pick up the little gold flake, and you find that it leads to this whole vein of gold. But if you didn't pay attention, to that little thing of like, there's something about the energy here to talk about the grandfather and about fishing. And then to sort of break the frame of therapy and to say, I'm going to go out on a limb here. Let's go fishing. He didn't like push you in the water or something, or break your fishing pole, or do some sort of antisocial thing. So he's struggling. The doom, probably he had a tough childhood. Doom in his environment, with adverse childhood experiences, but that doom had gotten in him. He wasn't living authentically from himself. He was just recreating the doom spiral around. And so he was going to potentially create another generation of doom. But you found that little balance point or still point in there, and just a little tiny touch on that, and the healing happened of itself.
I,
The great
I
whole
want,
health story too of like, when we say, ask him what matters most. And he might have, I don't know if he would have said fishing and his grandfather matters most, but your careful listening found that that was something of value. When there was all this other stuff that he didn't have value for, that was something of value. And when you went towards it and started to crank the circle of health, you went um, personal development and surrounding for the fishing. You went somewhere different. And then that led to, new relationships and new experiences and maybe empower, growth in the power of the mind where he had these new connections.
this conversation right at this moment makes me think of this question that we're looking at again, where we started with free doom,
Mm-hmm.
and how do we as humans live fully within that if that's true? And so one of the things that's coming up of what you're saying is how might we find that little vein of gold? Um, and if we do, what are ways of accessing it? What are ways that, and we do that in relationship. We're getting back to Martin Buber,
Mm-hmm.
um, and and then following it and seeing where it might lead us. But to me, it gets at this place of what are ways that we, and the question that you're asking, which is used in the VA, is what really matters. There may be other questions and other ways of accessing it. I'm not sure that's the only way. It's a good way, certainly it's helpful, but what are other ways that we can access that um, given the constraints of free, and doom? And I think inherent in this, maybe, I don't know if you'd agree with this, based on my own limited understanding, I would think that a big part of this can come about through some degree of awareness, some degree of a listening, that it invites some degree of attention. And I wonder if that is one way, one avenue, one pathway for those persons who might be. I mean, I talk like you to a lot of people, and I hear that question being asked in so many different ways. What am I to be doing right now, given a lot of change? And many people are without work. One of them here, and this question of, what am I supposed to be doing? What is my purpose? What is my mission? And it seems to me that one way that at least puts us oriented in this way is the degree that we can bring awareness and attention to our own lives, and maybe what's going around our
Yeah,
lives.
I've got a question for you. You like to meditate, right?
Do I like to meditate or do I meditate?
You have experience with meditation.
I have some experience.
Is freedom related to meditation? I mean, how could freedom have anything? Well, I'm going to assume you're going to say yes. How can freedom have anything to do with sitting on a cushion somewhere? I mean, you've had to have people do interventions on you to meditate less.
It's such a good question you're asking, and I happen to think it's larger than meditation, but just for the sake of our conversation, um, let's let's rest with meditation, at least in my experience. So for me, meditation is one practice that I do that I think helps me to orient to what we're calling that vein of gold. I don't go into it, although there are times I do, but on my better days, I don't go into it with that. because it's trying to make something happen. Um, but it's just a way of helping me at times to be able to see beyond my own self, my own ego, which is really hard to do, Dave.
Yeah, yeah. It's like
But I
that
do
in
think,
hollow bone type of thing, similar type of thing of your could say meditation could help you connect to whether it's authenticity or the healing force, or it's just um, letting you see reality more clearly because your ego and distortions and defenses and grasping is kind of taken out of the picture. Um, but it's a similar, I think the shamans are probably in a meditative state when they're becoming hollow bone. And I think that healing moment is a meditative state. That moment of like grandfather and fishing, and you shift into the state that allows you to transcend the bounds of I'm a therapist, we sit in a room and do therapy.
yeah.
So meditation maybe could be practice for life, practice for being able to sense that vein of gold. When the vein of gold, when you stumble upon it, being able to notice it rather than just to rush
And
onward.
and I'd even say this. I don't know if meditation does that or always does that. Probably not always does it. And
I
yet,
think we can say anything about meditation, though, really, right?
but I think here's what it can do. I think the very practice of meditation, of developing or cultivating awareness can be helpful in our lives off of the cushion,
Yeah.
you know. I think there are times where I see things and hear things that if I didn't have that morning practice of meditation might just like go off my radar or I wouldn't pay any attention to it. It's like yesterday, a couple examples. My friend that I was talking about that lives across the street, and we're also having a side conversation is when your organization is going through a crisis and there's no answers and there's jobs at stake and there's a huge amount, I mean, we're talking millions of dollars at stake. Um, and you're the person that has to make these decisions. What do you do? I mean, how do you keep yourself in a place that allows you to be as aware and as compassionate and as effective and efficient as possible? And we had this delightful conversation. One of the things that he was saying is that he's very much aware that he is that instrument, that person. And in addition to all of the Zoom meetings that he attends and bringing in all of these FBI and all of these other organizations, that he's deliberately taking days off. He's deliberately, I see him walking around the block, again, getting some movement in his life. We sat on his back porch, we had tea together. Um, and I just had such a deep respect. Here's someone that is really facing a pretty serious crisis. Not only, I mean, for the community, to be honest, with all the students, because many of the students are students that are underserved in our community. And in the midst of all of that, he has this ability to know that he needs to take care of himself. In these radical acts of taking days off of work and taking walks and these sort of things. And I felt such deep respect for that in the context of what he was telling me.
Yeah. There's a vein that I think I'm going to skip over, just mention as we're passing it, and maybe we'll come back to it someday. I was thinking we might want to do a book club on Timothy Snyder's Our Malady, where he talks about the healthcare system after he had a serious illness. In Our Freedom, he's got a place that he talks a lot about the medical system and how it's become capitalistic and the focus is not on health, but on making money from disease. And he kind of concludes that to be sick or to be dead is not freedom. So, but let's kind of skip over. We've spent a lot of time in the healthcare freedom part, and with you're talking about the CEO, we're starting to go into the, um, kind of the workplace more. And I'm leaving the VA. I'm reflecting a lot on the VA and the ways that I've felt less free in the VA since all this efficiency talk has come in with, Doge or Doggy, as I like to call it. Um, and I'll just read a little bit about efficiency, what Snyder says on efficiency. Freedom required care with words. In conceding a word, we concede a concept, and in conceding a concept, we give up the thing itself. And one of the things that we've had in this administration is an assault on language. And you've kind of seen some of this with the SDOH course, the social determinants of health course, and I've been involved in this at the VA, where I've been in meetings where we know we're not supposed to use these certain words that are banned, and then there's other words on the edge of it we think we probably shouldn't use, but then we're starting to go into self-censorship. And I was in a meeting one time with a VA whole health administrator who said, there's certain. I said, well, what words can we really not use? Because there's the New York Times 100 words, banned words, that were collected from numerous agencies. And I said, what are the actual words that somebody has told us we can't use? And she was like, well, there's really three. There's the first one, the second one. She said, and I can't remember the third one because I'm trying so hard not to use it accidentally.
Huh.
And I thought, they have succeeded. They have erased not just, we know that we can't say the word, but it even erased the concept and the word from her mind. So, um, let's see. So, with our embrace of efficiency, it places why out of bounds, offering an endless how. Efficiency talk distracts us from thinking about purposes and hastens us instead towards a calculation regarding how quickly something is being done. Commercial medicine, for example, is efficient in extracting money from the sick. This is where he kind of talks about all this with healthcare. Um, and says there's nothing new about dehumanizing efficiency jargon. Efficiency was an argument for American slavery in the 19th century and for Nazi and Soviet concentration camps in the 20th. Um, Julius Margolin, in his memoir of 5 years in the Gulag, defined it as a place where no one could ask why. Here there is no why, said an Auschwitz camp guard, Primo Levi. So, here's let's skip over to this then and talking about the free market. Um, Markets can't be free. Only people can be free. Freedom is a human value, can be recognized and pursued only by humans. The moment we delegate freedom to the market or anything else, it becomes mission. When people surrender the word free, freedom vanishes from their lives. So I don't know, where can we go with this? I mean, I feel the sense of doom from, an assault on language, an assault on, it seems like we're in a place where the idea of America being great means that America can kick those who are weak. It doesn't seem about compassion, caring. It seems about an exercise of strength, and bullying. It really feels a lot like bullying to me. And that's what I was feeling at the VA, was kind of bullied into doing all these things that seemed meaningless and purposeless, but we were told to do, like every week send 5 things that we did that week to some anonymous email address that Elon Musk, then everyone worried he was going to run it through AI and somehow we were going to be ratting on ourselves. And that, in a sense, that's, when you have to report what you're doing every week to someone who's not your immediate boss, you wonder, what actually is, what am I saying? I'm confessing. They're training you to confess to authority that isn't even legitimate authority. It's not your boss. It's, some anonymous agency somewhere. And it's not even a person. It wasn't, hi, I'm John Smith from the OIG, and I'm writing to ask you about this. It was, the email would say something like, I can't remember if it was OIG or another department, but it'd be like OIG.19 is who the email would be from. Please tell us what you did last week. So where do you want to go with this, Chris? Do you want to say we're about out of time?
I mean, as you were saying that, I again was thinking of some of my experiences with that. Um, During this time, I have been reading um, from a book by Father Richard Rohr, who is a Franciscan priest and writer. And I think what has been helpful in some of the writings that I've read from him is this larger view of of really the world, and he makes it again very simple. He talks about order, and he talks about disorder, and he talks about reorder, and that he brings us into looking at again the Hebrew scriptures as well as the New Testament scriptures, and also, I think, looks at it in terms of just history. And so this for me has been helpful. And so obviously, this is a time of disorder. And I don't think anyone can predict how long or where it will go, but it's certainly parallel to many other times in history where there has been a lot of disorder. And it's breaking away from the order that was. And so part of what eventually will happen is from this, there will be some sort of reorder. And I don't think anyone knows what that's going to look like. But there's at least hope that in the reordering that we'll learn a few things from this particular time that you and I may see and may not see.
Let me ask
Um,
you a question. Is this something that we work for or something that we wait for?
I think it's both. I mean, it's so that's a great question because there's an element that is waiting in that it kind of gets at what we were talking about earlier, that an element that life as we experience it, history is going to shape itself in ways that probably none of us are able to fully control. And yet, part of what he and others are saying is in what ways can we be agents toward some of the things that we hold and value? That there are still many of us that have a value on compassion and have a value on me and we. And so the idea is that in the places that we're able, and hopefully in our communities, and that we're able to bring that perspective, and and maybe in time it will grow and emerge as we continue as a human species to evolve and hopefully survive.
Yeah. You know, Joseph Rael and I wrote a piece for About Place Journal called Make America Healthy Again. And I was, kind of riffing on the MAGA to Maha, but now Make America Healthy has been co-opted by meaning, make America unhealthy by taking away access to vaccines. Um, but the new one I'm trying is MACA, Make America Caring Again,
Mm.
MACA. Um, and I think there's something, it can seem like a useless enterprise to play around with words, but when your words are being taken away and co-opted, I think about Václav Havel starting off as an absurdist playwright, and somehow he ended up as president of Czechoslovakia. He just sort of started standing up and riffing on things and speaking up for, freedom and democracy and truth and hope. And that led him down this path somewhere. Um, So I think about this, like what I can have that sense. I feel pretty confident about the cycles of history and empires and the dissolution of empires. And, you know, you might find this surprising, but when I come to a problem, I try to find the book that's going to help me come to a new understanding of that problem. So I read through all the dystopian fiction like Orwell's 1984 and Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale and Philip K. Dick's Radio 3 Albemuth. And in reading these books, I see, okay, things aren't as bad as they could be, but I feel like there's always this resistance in these books, whether the resistance succeeds or fails. Or I just started reading Cloud Atlas, David Mitchell, Cloud Atlas, and that's a movie that I love. I've watched it numerous times. You know, sometimes almost once every year or two, I'll watch Cloud Atlas, and it just has all these different, almost like archetype and templates of um, oppression and resistance, and how this just sort of plays out in human history. And it seems like oppression, in a way, we could think of it as the doom. It creates the freedom response, or creates the resistance response, where at a certain point, someone and then a group of people says, "This just doesn't seem right. You know, this is not life, and I would rather lose my life and speak up about this than um, you know, kind of exist this way under these rules that someone else is defining my existence and reality and experience."
I think that's where I land, is that they're always going to be together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And but I do think, getting back to the one question you're asking, is that we do have agency in
Mm.
terms of where we position
Nice.
our.
I like how you worked that back in. That was your question about agency, and then you made it seem like I was talking about agency. Maybe I was, but I never
You got
answered
me
that
think,
one.
you got me thinking about it. Um,
Uh-huh.
but there, I mean, we all have some degree of agency, and it's this, to me, this idea of practicing it, even though it seems like it's futile. And yet I don't think it is. I don't think it is um, when I really think about it. We may not see the fruits of that, of the values that we think are really important. But I think it's still important to practice and to be them. And to me, that's becoming a true human.
Great. We can close with this with Václav Havel, or if you've got a meditation, we didn't plan this ahead as usual, but if you think about for a moment, if you've got a meditation. But Václav Havel, when he wrote about hope, you know, he was imprisoned several times, and he defined hope as not necessarily optimism and not necessarily um, belief that something is going to be successful. So he took it away from the world of actions um, and sort of goals, and instead said, you know, hope is more of a prognostic factor. It's more of a spiritual kind of place or a being or a sense of being. And I kind of take it to mean that hope is something that you have to do to become a true human and to remain a true human. Because if you lose hope, you're no longer you've lost whatever that is. You've lost your connection to the vein of gold, even if it's just a little flake of gold, the vein of gold. Even if you hold on to that, you've got something, and that could be, you know, the spark of life or the soul or whatever that is. So I see my realtor pulling up here. Do you have a meditation, or should we kind of end
I
at this point?
Actually, I think that's a lovely way to end. As you know, the my book on hope is with the editor, and I think I think that's a lovely. I just saw a research article, and I'll be really quick, and it was touting hope as that offers meaning in one's life. And they were saying that even more so than compassion, that's what got my attention. So it was interesting to see hope sort of getting the light shining on it in the context of the world that we're living in. So I think it's a good way to end hope.
Come for me, they're knocking at the door. I gotta go.
I'll see you later.
Stay strong.